Hey there everybody, welcome back to our channel. Today I thought I'd drop some intel to help us explore two fantastic tabletop wargames. Halo Flashpoint and Dead Zone, both by Mantic Games. Buckle up, because we're about to compare their rules, mechanics and overall gameplay. Will the UNSC hold their ground against the desperate scavengers of Dead Zone? Let's find out. I'm just going to talk about the setting of the two games a little bit to start. First up, we have Halo Flashpoint. Set in the iconic Halo universe, this game lets you command crack fire teams of Spartans, with more species to come. The Flashpoint rules add an extra layer of intensity to combat, bringing the richness of the Halo multiplayer sandbox to the tabletop. The game is generally set in the current Halo time period, so around 2560. After a devastating intergalactic war of annihilation with a group of religious aliens, collectively called the Covenant, humanity has had about 8 years to rebuild their resources and train the next generation of super soldiers, the Spartan 4s. The Covenant, having all but dissolved after discovering their religion was based on lies, splintered into widespread factions, some at peace with humanity and some wishing to continue the war. One such faction, the Banished, are a Jirohani, or colloquially known as Brutes, led faction and are an amalgamation of various species. They wish to secure their position in the new power vacuum post-war by any means necessary. For Dead Zone, the game is set in the Warpath universe. Dead Zone is currently on its 3rd edition, with the latest major update in 2021. The galaxy is a dangerous place, from the brutal pitches of Dreadball leagues to the war-torn battle zone of the frontier. Everything is up for the taking. Within the GCPS, whole planets are sold, annexed or stripped to feed humanity's vast greed. The Forge Fathers implacably stand against them, fighting for resources and wealth, and meanwhile, the mysterious Astarians fight for their own agendas. Threats long ignored, such as the terrifying plague or the insidious vermin, strike uncivilized worlds. Dead Zones, enacted by the ruthless enforcers, quarantine these threats from the rest of humanity. Powerful races clash over the fates of whole worlds. Devastating weapons, swift aircraft, and formidable tanks are brought up to bear. Mighty armies take to the battle zones of the far future to fight for their leaders, as the galaxy is plunged into war. With our brief look at the universes and settings done, let's dive into the real meat of the video. Halo Flashpoint vs Dead Zone. All rules changes. I'll try to go through this in a similar order to the Halo Flashpoint book, but the chapters do jump around a little bit, so hopefully it won't be too hard to follow. I will also mostly focus on the changes between the games and not so much the things that have remained the same. First up, the dice of the games. Both games utilize a D8 dice system, with most dice pools starting at 3 dice, then being modified by various bonuses. In both games, most rolls are opposed. Example, you and your opponent roll at the same time, with whoever rolls the most successes being the victor. Both games also make use of a dynamic command dice system, which I'll go into more detail later. All in all, no real changes are made to the basic concept of the dice system across both games. We will now move on to the most basic model stats, how they are laid out, and any changes there may be. Halo Flashpoint utilizes a unit card system, whereby each model is fielded with a unique unit card to keep track of various tokens such as shields, weapons, and etc. The current edition of Dead Zone does not have unit cards, and instead makes use of a basic forced list book where you draft teams based on model points. It is worth noting that the first edition of Dead Zone did use unit cards, which were quickly scrapped in subsequent updates. Whether this is an indicator for the future of Flashpoint, I cannot say. Dead Zone models all have a size stat and a base size stat, printed on their respective force list. The size stat, shown as S and Z, is used to determine how many models can fit in a cube. In Dead Zone, you cannot have more than 4 total size in a cube, with most models being size 1, bigger models being size 2, and even huge models being size 4. Halo Flashpoint's cube capacity is different, and at launch is set to a basic 2 models in a cube, and so has no use for the size stat at this time. The base size stat in Dead Zone is just a nice quick reference for how big the default base size for a model is. Things like 25mm for a small model, 60mm for a weapon team, and so on. I believe this was added in response to the customization many players felt they can do in Dead Zone, so players can always refer to the size a model should be if needed. At this time, Flashpoint models are delivered pre-assembled and on bases, so I guess the expectation is that players don't alter the bases too much for Flashpoint, so there is no need to reference base sizes. Halo Flashpoint introduces shield tokens. Though this may be more of a new keyword than a stat, it is a big new addition, so I'll talk about it here, especially since it seems like most of the foreseeable models will be utilizing shields. Shields are basically an added layer of protection for Spartans and their alien equivalents. In Flashpoint, when being attacked, you roll your save. Once all saves are compared to attacks, you then allocate any remaining attack dice to the model. Before moving on, you reduce any number of attacks by the current number of shields a model has, which then flip over, are turned off. You then move on to armor and armor piercing, then allocate wounds against HP of a model. At the end of the round, any model that has lost a shield regains one back, and if a model respawns, which I'll talk about later, they respawn with all their shields back. Dead Zone has no real functional equivalent. Dead Zone has several model types across the game, things like leaders, troopers, legends, and so on. These are all used for drafting teams, with an example being all teams must have one leader, and for each support you take, you must have one troop. Flashpoint at launch is a bit more simplistic with team drafting, as it is just any 4 models, or any agreed to amount with your opponent, and so at this time, model types are not present. All Dead Zone models have an associated victory point or VP stat. These VPs show how many points your opponent gets if that model is destroyed for any reason, with high value models being worth maybe 3 or 4 points and cheaper models being maybe worth 0 or 1 point. And so on, and is a key way to win games in Dead Zone. Flashpoint does not have this stat on the unit cards, and instead any VPs you gain for model destruction are dictated by what game mode you are playing. So for a kill game mode, like Slayer, models are worth 1 point on destruction, but for an objective game mode like Oddball, you don't get any points for killing models, except with the Oddball. As I said above, in Dead Zone, you draft teams based on a force list. When you do so, you draft your team up to a certain point threshold agreed to between mod opponents, usually 100, 150, or 200 points. Each Dead Zone model has an associated purchase points cost, and so that dictates how many of any model you may take. As before, Flashpoint at launch is a bit more simplistic in fire-team construction, and so there is no need for this stat at launch. However, Mantic has already revealed in their Wave 2 release coming up around March 2025 that there will be a Wargame expansion pack that reintroduces points-based team drafting, like Dead Zone, for a more dynamic team-building experience. Unfortunately, there is no word if this points book will be free for all players, or even how quickly it will become obsolete with subsequent model releases. But with that, we have finished all the changes between the two games in regards to the basic model stats and unit cards. We will now move on to dice tests and how they function across the games. As I mentioned at the start, both games utilize a D8 dice system with an added command dice system. The only functional change to these rules across both games is the renaming of exploding 8s. In both games, for almost any dice test, if you roll an 8, you immediately get to roll an additional dice into your pool, which then can result in another 8 and continues to explode. This system allows for players to have the chance to critically succeed in almost impossible situations, if they are lucky enough. In Dead Zone, this is called exploding 8s. In Flashpoint, they have renamed it to Headshots. While functionally the exact same, I do feel the name Headshots is mildly confusing, especially for brand new players to the system. Trying to explain that, yes, you still score a headshot when saving against a frag grenade, just doesn't intuitively feel right. I think maybe something like Overkill would have worked and is still thematically in the Halo universe. With all that done, we now move on to the section called Rules. I'll continue to try and have this match the Halo Flashpoint book as much as possible. As mentioned, I will only try and focus on differences and won't just be reading the whole book to you. The first change in this section comes when describing friendly and enemy models. In Dead Zone, the game includes a third identifier, neutral. There are no neutral models in Flashpoint, but that is probably more than fine, as I have yet to play any Dead Zone match that utilizes a neutral model. Now here is a bit of false advertising in the cubes and stacks section of the book. The Flashpoint book claims the Flashpoint Deluxe terrain set can be built in, quote, an infinite number of ways. Surely that is hyperbole, because infinite number of ways is a very large number of ways. I'll let them pass on it this time though. With that out of the way, this section is largely the same between both books. Cube capacity is set at 2 models, as mentioned before, and associated reference to size are removed in Flashpoint as compared to the Dead Zone book. Measuring range now takes up a full page in the Flashpoint book, but it actually just consolidates information that was spread out across multiple pages in the Dead Zone book, so it is just more streamlined and easier to refer to. Functionally, this is the same across both games. Count cubes, determine ranges, etc. The line of sight section removes references to vehicles as a model type in the Flashpoint book, probably as they won't be present in the Flashpoint game, at least for a while. The Flashpoint book also removes the reference to model eyes views when drawing line of sight, but this is probably because it was an unnecessary comment. comment. For disagreement on line of sight, the Flashpoint book says to ask a nearby person for help or roll a die. In Dead Zone, this was roll a die to decide any 50-50 cause that they cannot agree on. Line of sight to a cube is added to this section of the Flashpoint book, but once again, it is just more consolidating other rules that were spread out across the Dead Zone book, and so is better and more streamlined in the Flashpoint book. Example photos so far have been pretty much the same across both games. However, there is a typo here. It claims Model A cannot see the cube behind Model B. This is clearly wrong or just vague and should probably just say something like cannot draw line of sight through a solid panel to a cube. We are now onto the rounds and turns section of the Flashpoint book. In Halo Flashpoint, rounds begin by placing new items and respawning weapon drops, which is another big change in Flashpoint with the respawning nature of these items, which I'll go through later. In Dead Zone, you just start with command dice. References to the term initiative are removed from Flashpoint, which is ultimately fine as this had not much functional effect in Dead Zone. With placing activation tokens, these are put on the model's unit card in Flashpoint instead of the battlefield on Dead Zone, which is a welcome change to help declutter the playing board. Taking turns is removed as a subsection here, but there are no other changes. References to out-of-turn actions is added to this section in Flashpoint, and just says to refer to the out-of-turn action as needed. Passing a turn is the same across the books, but to be clear, when you do this, you aren't forced to activate a model, but just skip an activation cycle. When doing this, you may only do it if you have fewer models than your opponent, and you may continue to pass activations if you have nothing left to activate. For end of turn, this Flashpoint section removes references to victory points and VPs earned through standing on VPs. That is because most every game mode in Dead Zone involves standing on something, whereby this is dictated by only certain game modes in Flashpoint. We will now move on to the rolling command dice part of the Flashpoint book. There are many changes to this part of the book from Flashpoint to Dead Zone. In Flashpoint, you start with a base pool of 2 command dice, then cumulatively add more dice equal to the total value of the keyword tactician across your team. In Dead Zone, you start with a base of 3 dice, then may add only 1 instance of tactician, which is usually your team leader, but not always. There are also a small number of other ways to add command dice, but that's the main one. In Flashpoint, the restriction to re-rolling command dice is removed based on the strength of your team. In Dead Zone, if you were at or below half strength, you could not re-roll command dice. In Flashpoint, you may re-roll command dice up to the value of tactician present on your team. This would be due to the respawning nature of Flashpoint's teams and overall smaller team sizes in Flashpoint. Setting command dice in Dead Zone is renamed to placing command dice in Flashpoint, which is entirely arbitrary. The tactician keyword now allows for a player to carry over unspent command dice between rounds of Flashpoint. A player may carry over any number of unspent command dice equal to their team's tactician value. In Dead Zone, unspent command dice were always discarded. Mantic added a note about tactician here, which makes sense to put it where it is needed. There are more changes to tactician we will go over in the keywords section. It is written later in the command dice section, but I will mention it now. Command dice may no longer be used to re-roll D8 dice in Flashpoint. In Dead Zone, instead of spending a command dice for its ability, a command dice could be used once each time you make a roll to re-roll a miss/fail. Those are the basic changes to the rules, so now onto the command dice themselves and the command dice table. +1 model / +1 initiative dice. This result is renamed from Dead Zone's +1 initiative to Flashpoint's +1 model. I do prefer initiative, as it is standard military term in keeping with the Halo universe, but that is just a preference. Dice is almost the exact same, in that it allows a second activation once each turn, thereby skipping your opponent's next activation. However, it now also allows you to steal first turn if you wouldn't otherwise be going first, which is a pretty cool addition. As like I said, they could no longer be used to reroll a D8. The dice symbol, advance symbol, shoot symbol, and advance symbol are all the exact same across both games. The special order dice removes references to leader in Flashpoint, as your special order now dictated by the faction you choose to play in Flashpoint rather than the leader you have in Dead Zone. The Flashpoint book adds an example of how to use command dice and how a shoot, assault, advance dice may be used once per model per activation. There's still some sneaky ways to use these dice, so keep a lookout for tips and tricks videos to help improve your Flashpoint gameplay. Finally, for this section, the Flashpoint book adds a reminder of the Spartan faction's basic special order being Snapshot. The special orders would usually be on the leader force list section in Dead Zone. We will now move on to the actions part of the Halo Flashpoint book. This section remains largely unchanged. However, Flashpoint does introduce a new type of short action for models. Models may now take a short action crouch. A crouched model gains a +1 shoot die, as well as a +1 save die against shoot actions. However, a model loses this crouched token if they move either voluntary or through forced movement. Special actions in Dead Zone are now renamed to auxiliary actions in Flashpoint. Functionally the same, they are contextual and are used for a variety of things. The rename is probably for the best, as it better distinguishes this action from the special order dice on the command dice table. For the rest of the action section, the Flashpoint book has largely been reorganized as compared to the Dead Zone book. Mostly, it would seem to consolidate rules into a single section. I may jump around a little bit, but bear with me. Stand-up action is the same, but now includes a note about a fringe case of a model standing up in a cube with an enemy model that is also pinned. Clarity is always good, so this is a welcome addition. Auxiliary action is renamed, as I already mentioned, but remains unchanged otherwise. The advanced section is largely the same, but now includes diagrams on the page, consolidating information otherwise spread out in the Dead Zone book. The sprint section is the exact same. Crouch is brand new and not present in Dead Zone, as I've already gone through. Shooting is now a single page, instead of being spread out across 2 pages like in Dead Zone, which is a good update. The shooting section is fairly similar across both games, but now mentions some weapons have firing modes, which must be declared when using them. In addition, this section now also includes notes about how explosives may affect the roll, in that they target cubes and not models. It also mentions Spartan Snapshot as an example. This section now makes a note of crouch as a modifier for both shooting and saving. It also now makes a reference to hits instead of HP, in keeping to the redesign of the damage section, which is coming up. The assault section has been redone in the Flashpoint book, and I would say this is the first instance of where the Dead Zone book wins out. This section of the Flashpoint book now includes a lot of vague may wording, which upon casual reading may lead people to the impression that assault is an optional action when entering cubes with enemy models, instead of a mandatory one. Example, an assault may also be triggered as a free action when a model moves into a cube containing an enemy model. With that casual read, it is unclear that this free action is mandatory. I believe this is an allusion to edge case rules, such as moving into a cube due to knockback and pinning. I think this is poorly worded, as the book should write rules for the majority of cases, then include rules for edge cases, instead of the other way around. I think the section was better written in the Dead Zone book. With that nitpick out of the way, I'll continue. The assault action has now been changed in a fairly substantial way, in that the model initiating the assault now gets to fight, and the model being attacked may only save. This is a big change from Dead Zone, where both models could either choose to fight or survive during any assault, other than edge cases such as pinning. This change will largely detriment models with good fight stats, as they no longer have damage potential if they are the ones being attacked. However, I think the change is good in that it does speed up the game by reducing player indecision, with players umming, ahhing, yeah, no, what's your fight stat, I have a good save though, and so on. Modifiers for assault removes references to size, as it is now redundant. This section also renames HP to hits on a model. With all the various changes to actions done, I'll move on to the damage and death section of the Flashpoint book. This section removes all references to redundant stats and keywords, such as size, etc. Damage tokens, as with all tokens, are now placed on the unit card instead of the battlefield. A big new addition in this section are shields, which I already went through, and respawns, which is still coming up. As a point of clarity, try to keep the following in mind. Do your attack roll, compare to the opponent's save roll, and reduce your attack successes by their save successes. Then compare your remaining successes against their remaining shields, keeping note of any ESC, which is a new keyword we will go through later. After that, you then move on to armor and armor piercing. Any remaining successes are then allocated to the opponent's model HP. More simplified, it is saves, shields, armor, HP, in that order. Next up in Flashpoint is the movement section, and further notes on how movement works. All the various movement rules come in a single solid block of pages in the Flashpoint book, instead of being spread out in the Dead Zone book, which is a better layout. The first subsection is moving into cubes with enemies. This all reads pretty much the same, but it is much clearer that this will end any in-progress movement actions, such as sprinting and advancing. So you cannot move into a cube with an enemy, do the free assault, then continue your in-progress sprint or advance. Next up is breaking away, which is pretty much the same, but now includes a note that if a pinned model is chosen to fight the breaking away model, nothing will happen, which is good for clarity. After that, we have the effects of scenery section, which is broken into a few smaller subsections, moving on the same level. For the diagrams in this section, it seems like they forgot to include any numbers for the diagrams, despite the diagram notes referencing the letters. This section, as with all sections, removes references to size and now gives a blanket 50% gap and or cube height as possible with no issue. In the Dead Zone book, there was a kind of table with different gaps that related to different size models, so moving is now easier in Flashpoint in this regard. This section adds a note about moving diagonally, that even if the route would take you temporarily into a cube with an enemy or item, you do not interact with them. It only matters where you end up in a diagonal move. This section removes references to jumping across gaps, but I think using the 50% cube size reference, any gap that is up to or less than half a cube is easily jumpable. As mentioned, this section also removes the wall gap chart that Dead Zone had. The next subsection is moving up and down levels. Generally, in this section, Flashpoint, there are many notes including traveling across 6 orthogonal routes and expands upon moving downwards. There is a vague reference here to models climbing down walls to avoid falls. As worded in the book, to move down more than one level through cubes with no floors, the model must climb scenery or it will fall. I find this is fairly vague in its terminology. The book references all the pre-colored cardstock terrain you get as scenery, and in fact any terrain on the player space is referred to as scenery. Does this mean if you are on the 3rd level of building and wish to climb to the 1st level, thereby going down 2 levels, you may do so by climbing down the outer walls of the building? Or does this just mean things like ladders must be used or you will fall? I'm going to leave that up to you to decide as I move on to hatches. Hatches gains its own subsection, but it's the same rules between both books, and as always removes references to size. The same as hatches, moving over obstacles gains its own subsection but is also unchanged. We now have a mini subsection titled partial cubes in the Flashpoint book. Gaps in floors is first up here and is pretty much the same, but worded somewhat cleaner in the Flashpoint book, but otherwise functionally the same. Half cubes is much the same, however as size is no longer in the game, half cubes only have a capacity for one model. Walkways and balconies as well as platforms are worded pretty much the same in both books, but does remove references to vehicles once again. A big omission in the Flashpoint book is overstacked cubes. As I have mentioned, Flashpoint sets cube capacity at 2 models. In Dead Zone, there is a rule called overstacked cubes. This said, if for whatever reason a cube became overstacked, the first action a model had to take when activating in that cube was to move directly out of it. Flashpoint has removed overstacked cubes, and the early reference to a similar rule is in the scatter rules, which we'll get to. You cannot scatter into the cube if it exceeds capacity. There, however, is no similar mention in the knockback rules. So, for example, you have 2 blue Spartans in a cube, with 1 more blue Spartan in the cube in front of them. A red Spartan shoots the single blue Spartan with a bulldog, which has the knockback keyword, and knocks it directly back into the cube behind, resulting in 3 blue Spartans in the cube, and thereby an overstacked cube. Overstacked cubes either needs to be brought back into the rulebook, or this edge case otherwise addressed. Another section that was removed from the Flashpoint book was close combat in half cubes. But as Flashpoint no longer has model sizes, this is largely unnecessary. For those wanting to know, it detailed how models with sizes bigger than a cube's capacity could still engage in melee with an enemy model in those cubes. With all the movement changes addressed, we are now onto the final rules section of the book, aptly named Additional Rules. First up in this section is pinned. The core of this section is the same, however Flashpoint does try to introduce pin tokens. I think this is entirely unnecessary, as just laying down the model is thematically much nicer to look at. However, this would affect line of sight to a model, as models may potentially lose line of sight depending on the pinned model's position, so may or may not cause disagreement in highly competitive games. This section now includes a note about pinned models being forced into cubes with enemies, via knockback, scatter, and so on. It says the opponent's model may engage in a free assault against the model moving into its cube if your model is pinned, which if you're keeping track is the opposite of what usually happens when a model moves into a cube. It also now includes that if 2 opposing models end up in the same cube pinned, the forced movement doesn't result in any action at all. Both models just remain pinned, which is different to Dead Zone, where they would both become unpinned but do nothing. And now we are finally here, respawning. This is a brand new addition to Halo Flashpoint, and this section details how destroyed models may respawn back in the game from various pre-arranged positions to continue to finish the fight. Things to keep in mind with respawning are, if a model dies before it activates in a round, it may respawn in that round, otherwise it will lose its activation next round as normal and respawn then. A respawning model must take an advanced action and move onto the board, and as such will be ineligible for a long action on the turn it comes in. Respawning models respawn with full shields and no wounds, etc. And if there happens to be a weapon available in the respawning cube, the model may choose to pick it up. With respawning out of the way, we are on to forced movement. improvement. This consolidates rules from many sections and FAQ/erratas, but is functionally the same in both games. Something to keep in mind is the model's owners always get to choose how that model is placed. We then have slammed into walls, and I guess walls in Halo are just built stronger than walls in Dead Zone. Walls now get 4d8 at 4+ to hit, and so are stronger than their Dead Zone counterparts, which is more than likely because of the prevalence of armor in Flashpoint. Wording in regards to damage and hits are now in line with the new damage mechanics, shields, and so on. Not only are the walls stronger, but so is gravity, as we move on to the falling subsection. For each respective height, Flashpoint gravity gains +1 die on the damage table over the Dead Zone counterparts, and is now still a 4+ to hit. There are now expanded notes here in regards to falling and scatter. As mentioned previously, there is once again another vague reference to models climbing down vertical scenery to avoid damage. And finally in this section, we are on to scatter. This is mostly the same, as a note that failing or succeeding an assault action happens first before any scattering, and that the new evade keyword happens after an enemy shoot action. As I mentioned, this is also the only spot that alludes to overstacked cubes, in that a model cannot be scattered into a cube that doesn't have capacity for it. And now, with all that finally done, we are finished with all the core rules of the games. All in all, I think the Flashpoint rules are superior to the Dead Zone ones in regards to being streamlined and easier to follow. The new additions to rules definitely go a long way to tweaking the gameplay enough to make it feel fresh and a great recreation of the Halo multiplayer. As I mentioned, there are a few issues with unnecessary vagueness, but nothing game-breaking, and nothing a potential rules update can't address. We now move on to the keywords section of the Halo Flashpoint rulebook. As you'd expect, there are a lot of changes through this whole section, and as such I won't be reading each individual keyword, but mostly giving an overview. I'll try to organize this the best I can as follows. Firstly, I will do keywords that have been updated or otherwise changed from Dead Zone to Halo Flashpoint. Then I will do all the new Halo Flashpoint exclusive keywords. Any Dead Zone keywords I don't mention aren't present in Flashpoint at all. So first up, we are on keywords that are present in both Dead Zone and Flashpoint, but may or may not have been renamed, and how they have been changed. Blast. This no longer auto-pins and scatters models, but instead depletes one shield from all models within one cube of the targeted cube. Example, you target an enemy model with a rocket. All models, friendly and enemy, within one cube distance will lose one shield. Energy shields. This was a keyword in Dead Zone, but is now completely different. I have already gone through this in this video, and so we'll move on. Evade. This is functionally the same, but now includes some extra notes in Flashpoint. This type of attack used to auto-hit a cube, sometimes in conjunction with other keywords like indirect, but now requires a 3 dice range test with a minimum of 1 success, so it's kind of a fusion of the Dead Zone indirect, as indirect isn't present in Flashpoint at all. On successfully hitting the cube, you then move on to rolling the damage for the type of attack, and this is when the opponent rolls their save for, as an example, a frag attack. On a fail, the attack scatters into a nearby cube. How a missile is able to scatter through a solid wall, I have no idea, but there you go. Penetrating hit perhaps. Fast transition, renamed from fire control in Dead Zone. Acts similar, but includes some extra notes. Notably, you must now shoot with 2 different weapons, not the same weapon, and if using a shoot command dice, you may not use this keyword. Fearless, being a fusion of both construct or solid in Dead Zone. In Flashpoint, this only ignores pinning effects. Solid used to also ignore scatter effects. Firing platform. Firing platform works the same between both games, but removes references to vehicles. Flight. This is the same between both games. Frag. This is the same between both games. Grenade. This is functionally the same between both games, but there are now different types of grenades with different keywords, which we'll go through. Horde. This is the same with extra notes. Jump packs and knockback are both the same. Life support. This is worded the same, however, because of shields, when this says return to an undamaged state, would that include the model's shields? Long, renamed from heavy in Dead Zone. This is the same. Normal shoot action with a long weapon needs a long action to shoot. However, a weapon that also has rapid fire can now still shoot as a blaze away action, which is a new addition. Medic uses a new auxiliary action terminology. The Flashpoint book is unclear as to if the medic model may target itself with this ability. It specifically made reference to this in Dead Zone. Does it still affect the medic itself? Is a friendly model in a cube with itself? Models used to also gain a resilient bonus, which would reroll a failed save, while in a cube with a medic, which this no longer does in Flashpoint. One use. This is the same. Optics, renamed Holosights. This is similar, but much more impactful in Flashpoint. Optics now grants headshots on 7s and 8s, as well as a +1 die for shoot actions. Notably, this doesn't say it can't be used in conjunction with a sniper scope, as it used to in Dead Zone, for when those keywords happen to line up. Rapid fire, this is fairly similar. When shooting with a rapid fire weapon as a blaze away, you ignore any benefits from either optics or crouching, whereas in Dead Zone it had no restrictions. Functionally, you still get 4 dice shoot test, but now in addition to becoming pinned, a model also loses 1 shield. Scout, fairly similar. In Flashpoint, you only gain a 1 cube pre-game advance, but in addition, a scout model may keep a crouch token when advancing, but not sprinting, which no other model can do. Smash, this is the same. You gain additional dice in assaults. Sniper scope, fairly similar. As mentioned, it removes the restriction that it can't be used in conjunction with optics, if you somehow manage to get both. When you shoot with a sniper scope, as a long action, you gain +2 dice and a headshot on 7s or 8s. Stealthy, this is similar, but it used to make clear shots impossible. Instead, your opponent only gains +1 dice for clear shot instead of +2 now. Suppression, this is the same, but it is less clear in Flashpoint as it removes the note regardless of wounds and hits. All models become pinned in the target cube when using a suppression weapon. Tactician has been completely revamped, as I have already touched on. Briefly, this is cumulative across all models that have Tactician, allows for adding that many additional dice to your command dice, allows for the carrying over of that many command dice between rounds, allows for the re-rolling of that many command dice if you wish to do so before placing your dice for the round. We're now on the Weight of Fire. This is the same, but is also now cumulative, so perhaps a weapon and a model both have it as a keyword. And with those keywords down, we now move on to the brand new keywords in Halo Flashpoint, and a brief overview of what they do. Acrobatic. Models with this keyword gain additional points for killing models in kill missions like Slayer. Active Camouflage. While a model has full shields, they are generally harder to shoot by not giving your opponent multiple benefits for things like clear shot or high ground. It is worth mentioning there is also a pickup item called Active Camouflage that does completely different things, so it is best not to confuse them. Perhaps renaming this to something like Stealth Coding would be better to prevent confusion. Continuous Fire. Weapons with this keyword gain Weight of Fire too, but once finished shooting, the model must take a save test or take damage. I don't really like this keyword as is, as keywords that refer to other keywords are always confusing. I think weapons Mantic wish to have Continuous Fire should instead gain +2 Weight of Fire natively, then rename this keyword to something like Overheat and give it to a weapon as well, and just have Overheat do the damage part of this keyword. That way, when you're reading it, you'll just say Weight of Fire to Overheat, which is clearer than Continuous Fire. What does that do again? Energy Shield Barrier. This is a similar effect to Energy Shield, or maybe Defender Shield in Dead Zone. Models covered by an Energy Shield Barrier gain the advantage that range attacks must completely deplete the shield before depleting model shields. There is, however, an edge case in regards to grenades. A grenade is thrown into the cube with the barrier. Do the models still benefit from the barrier's effects, or because the subsequent explosion isn't considered a ranged attack, does the barrier do nothing? There are similar issues for weapons with blast and so on. Energy Shield Depleter, ESD. This will exhaust energy shields equal to the energy shield depleter's value before hits are applied to normal shields and or armor. Implosion. This is a new type of grenade/explosive. Functionally, the exact same as frag, except it does not scatter or pin, just does damage, which I think is a little lackluster. I think it would be cool that instead of blasting a model away, the implosion pulls the model closer via force movement. As an example, a model is 1 cube away. I throw a implosion grenade 1 cube in front. The enemy model is pulled towards the implosion before any damage is dealt. Lethal. This deals additional damage to a model equal to the shown lethal value. Lunge. This details how a melee weapon may be used from a distance. At range 1, a model may use the lunge weapon as a shoot action, but use its fight stats instead of its shoot stats. Clear shot and high ground are the only advantages you still gain. It is unclear if a model using lunge gains shoot advantages such as Weight of Fire or melee advantages such as smash when using this keyword. I also think, thematically, saying I can shoot with my sword just doesn't feel right, and I think a tweak for this ability may be needed. Pack Mule. This keyword increases item and weapon carrying capacities for a model. Stoic. This is pretty similar to Fearless, except models with Stoic can't crouch, so I guess worse in that regard. Sticky. This is another new type of grenade. When making the initial range test for the grenade, if 2 successes are rolled, you can choose to degrade all shields of one model in the targeted cube. This once again causes some issues with Energy Shield Barrier and how these two keywords interact. Support weapon. Overall, only downsides if you hold this type of weapon. 2 uses. Just like 1 use, except twice as good. Weapons or items with this keyword may be used twice. Unstoppable. When charging, you gain +3 dice instead of the normal +2 dice. And that is the end of the keywords. Overall, many new and exciting inclusions that are sure to lead to fun and dynamic gameplay. It is a shame that there is just a bit too much vagueness on how some of these keywords interact, so just a little bit of tweaking may be necessary. And with that, we move on to the item section of the Flashpoint book. If you are reading along at home, you'll notice that the item section doesn't actually come after the keyword section. But I think I preferred it here instead of having to flip through the book to find them. So as such, I am going to go through them here. These items are completely different as you imagine. Broad changes include the addition of an item ID system, assigning each item a 1, a 2, or a 3, which is supposed to easily tell you what type of item it is. Maybe with more experience, this will become more natural, but I think it is cumbersome as it is. I won't go through each item specifically, but I'm going to bring up the active camouflage item. As mentioned, there is also a keyword called active camouflage that does entirely different things. Another issue is how active camouflage interacts with a whole variety of situations, such as an assault. Example, you have a camouflage model in a cube. Enemy moves into the same cube. Does this initiate an assault? Rules is written, the answer is yes, as an assault has no requirement to draw a line of sight to a model. However, the camouflage model also still gets to keep the camo in this instance. Another situation is grenades. Grenades do not require a line of sight to a model, just to a cube, and so can be used to deal with camoed models. But once again, after being blown up, scattered, or pinned, rules is written, the camo model gets to keep its camo. I think they need to include the following notes on this item. The effect lasts until the model is killed or takes a sprint action, a shoot action, an assault action, a save action, or becomes pinned. Enemy models moving into the cube while active camouflage is active are still able to engage in their assault actions. I think that will make this much clearer for people. I'll now move on to a new type of item called weapons and objective markers. Weapon items are brand new to the game and represent the whole plethora of weapons available in the Halo video game. Models may pick up weapons as a free action like any other item, and when attacking may choose to use them if they wish. Objective markers are contextual based on the game mode and can be things like skulls, flags, power seeds, or whatever. As with all items, picking these up is usually a free action. Models may carry up to 2 items, so both objective items and normal items. For weapons, a model dies while carrying a weapon, the weapon is removed from play, unless the model was killed in an assault. In that instance, the attacking model may choose to keep the weapon or drop it to the ground. Models may also choose to drop weapons and items into their cube as a free action. With that done, we are approaching the end of this video. We are now onto Scenario Setup, which was renamed from Playing a Game in Dead Zone. First up is Prepare Your Fire Team. Default is up to 4 models, or players may use advanced rules for things like legendary models, which I'll get to. So generally games will be 4 vs 4 models at launch. Select Scenario is the next part. There is the default Slayer scenario or 4 other scenarios to choose from. The book recommends rolling a d8 or just talking to your opponent about what you want to do. Set up the battlefield is next, and it's generally the same between both games. After that is place scenario objectives, then place items. This is the same, but removes references to VPs as they are redundant. You still randomly generate and place 8 items to begin with. There is also a note about item replenishing, which states that turn 2 onwards, you randomly generate and respawn 1 additional item each round. Weapon drops come next. Generally, each scenario calls for placing 4 spawn locations as indicated on the scenario maps. Then, each round, randomly generate 1 weapon to be placed on one of the spawn locations. I think personally, all weapon drop locations should start with a weapon. This adds to the dynamics and even fairness of the game. At least both sides of the board have an even chance of getting something. We are then on to determine who goes first. As default, this is a basic D8 roll for highest, re-rolling if tied. The winner determines sides and places their models first, then activates first on round 1. The recon table is still present in the advanced section, but I advise everyone to use it at all times because it is pretty sweet. Finally, for this section, we are on winning a game. This is a bit different due to the nature of the different game modes in Flashpoint. Broadly, you just refer to the scenarios themselves. A notable and big change is once the point threshold to win is reached, the game is immediately over, instead of playing to the end of that round. This is notable as it presumably will prevent any chance of tied games happening, and I think will be a welcome tweak. For those Dead Zone veterans, secret missions are removed entirely, which is great. I've never ever used them, nor seen anyone use them at all. We are onto the scenario/game modes themselves now. Broadly, there tends to be only one way to score points in each scenario, such as for kills, zones controlled, holding the oddball, and so on. Mantic has mentioned the inclusion of more game modes in future releases, but I think the potential for homebrew and community game modes are insane. Just like the Halo video game's custom matchmaking, people should feel free to experiment and post about their own wacky scenarios. I will be making a video soon going through some custom idea I have had, and so stay tuned for that. We are now onto the advanced rules section of the book. Firstly is the recon roll and recon table. This now gives both players access to pre-game actions determined by the successes, while determining first player. I do advise everyone use it as it is cool. Then onto advanced fire team building. Widely, this goes through how players may choose to build more unique and varied fire teams. This mentions Legends models, being characters such as Master Chief, and how for the purposes of team construction, these models take up 2 slots. In addition, a team may only include one of each legend, so you can't take 2 dual chiefs. It also has a section for team drafting instead of the traditional pre-planned teams, if people want a more dynamic team building experience. It does also note that Flashpoint isn't designed for mixing factions, so I guess Spartans and Elites, Elites and Flood, or whatever. But I'm sure players may be able to come to agreement about this if they want to. And that, dear viewers, is the end of the Halo Flashpoint rulebook as compared to the Dead Zone rulebook. As a brief roundup, I'll touch on some of the key changes for you Dead Zone longbeards. Number 1. Cube capacity is now set at 2 models. Rounds begin with placing items and weapons, which respawn each round. The game now ends as soon as the points total is reached. Number 2. Command dice. Command dice have changed, aligning with Halo Flashpoint rules. Start with a base of 2 dice, then add Tactician N, which accumulates between models. Tactician N allows carrying over dice between rounds for rerolls during the initial roll. Command dice cannot be used to reroll normal dice. +1 model, +1 initiative dice lets you steal the first turn, which can then be stolen back. Number 3. Actions. Added a crouch action as a short action. Provides +1 shoot die, grants +1 save die against shoot actions. Number 4. Assault melee. Charging now gives +2 dice. A model may only save against a melee attack, they cannot fight back, unless the charging model is pinned. Number 5. Damage, health, shields, respawn. Damage tokens placed on a unit card instead of beside the model. Some models gain energy shields, regenerate +1 shield each round, are taken into account before other damage, armor, HP, etc. Models can now respawn. If killed in a round they haven't been activated, they enter the board on the same turn. Otherwise, next turn they may come in. A model may respawn with a random weapon. Number 6. Stronger saves against environmental effects, slamming to walls and gravity. Number 7. Items and weapons. Models may carry 2 items and 1 weapon unless they have a special ability. Items spawn randomly each round, in addition to the starting 8 random generations. Weapons are new, spawn at specific points each round. If model dies with a weapon, that weapon is removed from play, unless killed in melee. Number 8. Team building. At launch default, take 4 of any model, except the hero character who counts as 2 models. Cannot mix factions, Elites and Spartans. So that's my brief overview of all the changes from Flashpoint to Dead Zone. My thoughts are, from the many games I have played of Flashpoint, I will say I generally believe it captures the chaos and fun of the Halo multiplayer sandbox in the best ways possible. There is so much potential for player customization and paint jobs, custom game modes, even custom unit cards, with the mixing and matching of keywords. While the game does have a few quality of life tweaks it could certainly do to improve the play experience, there is nothing game breaking or in need of immediate change. Personally, I do enjoy Flashpoint more than Dead Zone, not just from a setting point of view, but the rules are generally much tighter and the action almost non-stop in Flashpoint. They have refined a lot of what needs to be refined and wisely removed things that bog down the experience, leaving the player with a ready-to-play, straight-out-of-the-box skirmish game. But what do you think? What game comes out on top? Have you got plans to make any custom game modes? Let me know in the comments. And with that, I will be signing off. Thanks so much for watching this video through to the end. I spent much longer on this one than I usually do. I do hope that shines through. It would help me out greatly if you consider the whole YouTube rigmarole of liking, subbing, and commenting. Keep watching this space as I have plans for much more Flashpoint content. Remember to stay tactical, finish the fight, I need a weapon, and all the other Halo one-liners. I'll catch you next time.